Hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the Farsight Spotlight. We got a good turnout today. And today is sort of, I always have something different. And today is a little on the very different side. This is an intelligence briefing for today's Spotlight, but it's basically also an update on what the world has been doing and a little bit of an insight into stuff that we have been doing that you can see is really more relevant than many people may suspect. So I want to start out today talking about the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union was what Russia used to be before the end of the Cold War, but the Soviet Union had their own intelligence, and the U.S. intelligence, the CIA, as well as the DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency, was heavily concerned about the Soviet Union. Now, they don't study anything, the DIA and the CIA, they don't study anything that's not real. They don't waste their time doing things. They study stuff that is actually happening. And they released a report that very few people know about or talk about. They released it in 2003. However, it was written previous to that, during the Soviet Union time. It was actually written in 1972, but it was written by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, the Defense Intelligence Agency is the intelligence agency that works for the military. The CIA is the intelligence agency that works for the government, but the intelligence agency that specifically works for the military is very oriented around military stuff, especially things that adversaries are doing and things like that. Anyway, they had a report that came out that they wrote in 1972, but which was just released in 2003, that was called Controlled Offensive Behavior of the USSR. Now, one thing I want to really emphasize, that if the U.S. government was taking something seriously back in the Cold War days, trust me, they're still taking it seriously today. You cannot say that the U.S. government doesn't take things seriously because they just ended that. That doesn't happen. So they were interested in, the Defense Intelligence Agency was interested in controlled offensive behavior of the USSR, of Russia, the Soviet Union. And again, you have to really understand the remote viewing stuff that the military was doing, they took really seriously. And when they released the information about the remote viewing project, so-called Grill Flame or Stargate, or they had a whole bunch of names, that was to prevent it from coming out in a bigger way later. They knew it was going to come out, so they had to release it to the public, but they wanted it to stay in the bookstore, New Age bookstore community type of thing. And they weren't expecting it or wanting it to get into mainstream science. That was their real fear. So I want to give you a window into, at the very same time that they were going to be releasing it into the New Age bookstore community, I want to show you how seriously they really took it. And that, of course, sheds light on what they're doing now. They're obviously still doing and very interested in remote viewing. All right, and I'm going to be talking about with respect to some Farsight projects in just a little while. But now this report was prepared by the Office of the Surgeon General in the U.S. Army for the military, specifically for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Okay, and again, they're interested in control. They're interested in stuff that's serious, and they don't do anything. And this is a big report. It wasn't just a page or two. This was like a huge report. All right, so let me give you a little background for this, and then I'm going to read something in it that is going to tell you about, believe it or not, the whole death traps type of stuff that we've been talking about at Farsight, and the whole secrecy element with respect to Psi phenomena, as well as UFOs and UAPs. Okay, so let me read you a little bit from the report to start with, to give you a little bit of a background for it before I get to the really conk stuff that you're going to see. This report summarizes the information available on the Soviet research on human vulnerability as it relates to incapacitating individuals or small groups. The information contained in this study is a review and evaluation of Soviet research in the field of revolutionary methods of influencing human behavior and is intended as an aid in the development of countermeasures for the protection of U.S. or Allied personnel. Due to the nature of the Soviet research in the area of reorientation or incapacitation of human behavior, this research emphasizes the individual as opposed to groups. All right, now, this report is extremely extensive. It goes into stuff you have no idea about, so complicated and so detailed and stuff. They were going deep. That means they took the entire process of remote viewing and also remote influencing really, really seriously. They were looking at all types of weapons applications for it, and particularly they were interested in communication, such as telepathy, as well as literally incapacitating people at a distance and influencing their behavior at a distance. So when you hear about us talking at Farsight about extraterrestrials manipulating, say, political leaders at a distance, you have to understand that the United States has been concerned about that for decades, even with regard to the Soviet Union. So, they are for certain interested in that and investigating that themselves. So the report actually goes over all types of information, including how to use it to spread propaganda in the mass media, influencing reporters, influencing the media, things like that, from a distance. Now, that's what the Soviet Union was interested in trying to do. And then the CIA and the DIA was extremely interested in how they could actually go about that. But like part 4 of their whole section of their whole report is about propaganda and the mass media, how to control all of that at a distance with humans, with people. All right, now let me actually read you a little bit from the very beginning of the report so you can get an idea of how serious they were looking at this. And then I want to tell you something in the report that directly relates to our extraterrestrial phenomena as well as the death traps. So hang tight. Controlled, this is in the beginning of the report, near the beginning of the report. Controlled offensive behavior, as defined within the scope of this report, includes Soviet research on human vulnerability as it applies to methods of influencing or altering human behavior. There is an ever-increasing amount of information emanating from the former Soviet Union that suggests that certain authoritarian institutions in the USSR are engaged in the practice of mental reorientation of numerous individuals who are classified or are classed as political dissenters. The mental reorientation is accomplished through various means, including confinement, isolation, psychopharmaceutical administration, the whole 9 yards. This treatment of so-called insane individuals is causing alarm among an international cross-section of psychiatrists. The literature contains sufficient data of human mental manipulation and therefore warrants surveillance by interested parties. Now, it appears that the USSR stresses physical and medical treatment of its political detainees under the guise of psychiatric care rehabilitation. Okay, now, the reason I wanted to mention that part of it is to show you that their investigations of human capabilities, human vulnerabilities, the use of, had absolutely no brakes, meaning there were no limits to what they would do. They would go right into people that were dissenting, often, almost all people that are caught up in dissent back in the former Soviet Union days were locked up in mental hospitals, but they were just people who wanted to talk, who just wanted to, the normal people you see walking around and dissenting and, holding signs up and things like that in Europe and United States. Those are the people they called the dissenters, and they locked them up in mental hospitals. And they had absolutely no brakes in what they were willing to do to those people. From pharmaceutical stuff, putting things into them, drugs, all types of stuff. So I didn't read you further on. I'm going to read you a little bit when we get deep, but I didn't read you further on where they talked about the whole variety of stuff, including psychic stuff that they experimented on. So what I really want to emphasize is American intelligence isn't going to take that lightly and say, these people in the Soviet Union are experimenting across the board in all types of invasive and deep ways, and they might actually develop stuff that could affect us in the United States. So we have to know about that stuff as well. So you should not be saying, oh, that was done back in the past. They would never do that now. Let's be serious about this. Of course, they would try everything possible now. Now, in the United States, of course, they wouldn't put people up in mental hospitals just because they were dissenters, but they would try experimentation on human beings for whatever reason. Probably they might get volunteers. They might get people who are in the military, and they ask them to do this particular program. In the former Soviet Union, they used to simply arrest people, put them into mental hospitals, and then just sort of, do things to them. But the emphasis here is on they had no limits on what they were willing to try, to experiment, to try to figure out how to do things. So the advances that were made in that context were A, horrific, and B, extraordinary. Since they had no brakes, they tried everything. And they were able to push the boundaries. That was why the United States developed a huge interest in remote viewing and other things, because the Soviets were doing it without any limits. They were trying to go for the whole thing. So you can be absolutely guaranteed that that type of stuff the U.S. military was not going to release into the public. So they wanted the whole remote viewing field to be marginalized in the bookstore, in the New Age bookstore community. And that's what they do. That's what they did when they released the initial stuff about the U.S. remote viewing program. And then they said, but we closed it down. It was just a mistake. So if you believe that, then you're nuts. They didn't close it down. They just switched it over to another program, and you can be guaranteed it's still going on today. And to sort of emphasize this, in the new disclosure stuff that's coming out with the so-called UAP phenomena, is one of the biggest things with the military right now is the use of mental manipulation or mental powers, what they call psionics, to lure UFOs in, to sort of bring them in, to sort of guide them in, and then when they get them into a vulnerable spot, they shoot them down. So that is a huge thing, the use of psionics. Well, where do you think they learned how to do all that stuff? It all came out of this type of thing. So what I want to show you now is something really interesting, because I'm going to read from a report that gives you an idea of how deep the psychic stuff goes, not just in the United States, but with the extraterrestrials. Remember that the extraterrestrial presence has been known by the United States government and Russian government and a few other governments for a very long time. So they were aware, and have been aware for a long time, of the capabilities of the extraterrestrials with regard to mental stuff. So the United States wasn't just looking at the Soviet Union and worried about them. They were also looking at what the extraterrestrials were doing and wanted to be able to, A, defend themselves from the extraterrestrials, as well as just simply to learn how to do what they're doing. Okay, now let me actually show you this. Now, this is from a quote from that Defense Intelligence Agency report that I just showed you, okay? So what I'm saying now is I'm going to give you evidence that, in sort of in combination with the death trap stuff, is that there is a Psi shield that is done by extraterrestrials to dampen down the ability of you and everybody else to have remote viewing capabilities, to have telepathic capabilities, that it's not just you don't know how to do it. There's actually a shield, a field around the planet Earth that dampens down that capability, in addition to other things which I have talked about in the past and I'll repeat. Now, here it is. This is directly from the report. In 1967, the Soviet Maritime reported, that's a publication in Soviet Union, the Maritime, and this is a quote, "Cosmonauts, when in orbit, seem to be able to communicate telepathically more easily with each other than with people on Earth. A Psi, which is of course short for psychic faculty, training system has been incorporated in the cosmonaut training program, but the news provided no further details." Now, this is still from the report, some informal reports relayed to Ostrander and Schroeder, and that's a citation from the report, indicates that the Soviets are working on Psi systems for space use, involving not just telepathy, but also precognition. Okay, that's the end of the quote from that place. So, the Soviets, their cosmonauts, experimented with psychic abilities for telepathy. And what they found is when they were trying to use telepathy in space, they could use it more easily. It worked. It wasn't so hard. But when they tried to communicate telepathically with people on Earth, the Earthlings were dumbed down. They couldn't do it. But if you launched and went up into orbit, you could do it more easily. Does that make sense to everyone? In space, the telepathic capabilities of people is easier. And apparently, the farther you get away from the Earth, the easier it is. That's direct evidence that there is a suppression field on Earth, so that for people on the planet, they have direct capabilities that are suppressed with regard to telepathy and, of course, Psi functioning, remote viewing. Again, the only thing that's changing, you're using the exact same people, the only thing that's changing is a very nicely controlled experiment, is their position on Earth versus in orbit. In orbit, the telepathy works better. As soon as they come back to Earth, it doesn't work so great. That's clearly indication that there is a suppression field on the Earth. And then you have to ask, well, what causes that suppression field? Well, obviously, the only thing that's technologically advanced enough to do that is extraterrestrial phenomena, extraterrestrial technology. And again, it's a very nice experiment because you're dealing with the same people, cosmonauts or people on Earth. The only thing that they're changing is their location. Okay, now this backs up our hypothesis at Farsight about the death traps, based on all of our work dealing with the death traps and the concepts. And we've reported on that numerous times, including the Death Traps Project, as well as other stuff that we have done along the time. And you're going to see more stuff coming out relatively soon about that, so you have to really stay tuned. So this backs up our hypothesis about the death traps and the suppression of Psi ability on Earth. So humans are facing three elements of mental suppression. Now, get this. There are three things that are suppressing people from the ability to use their telepathic, their mental capabilities. The first is what we just talked about, which is a dampening Psi field on Earth to suppress telepathic and other Psi capabilities. There's an actual field. Think of it like an electromagnetic field. It's not, but it's something. Think of it like that, like an electromagnetic field where Psi capabilities are depressed in some way. Now, it may have electromagnetic elements in it, but it's not like a magnet or anything. But the point is that there is an actual field, and a real field, like you would have a field with a radio or a magnet or something like that, something that's technologically oriented. Okay, now that field is the first thing that suppresses the psi capabilities. Now the second is the actual death traps experience of rattling what we call the subspace mind. The subspace mind is you. That's you. You're an ISB. Everybody is an ISB. ISB is someone who is simply for the purpose of being. We don't use the word soul or spirit, but all people are composite beings, and we have a physical body, but we also have our real self. The physical body is like a car. It's just something we're in, and we use it, we get around in, and things like that, but that's not who we are. We are actually ISBs, and when the physical body dies, we pop out of it. And we've talked about the death trap thing a lot, which is you die. Now, under normal circumstances, without death trap machinery, you die, you just pop out of your body, and there you are. You see your dead body, but you also still see your friends and relatives and things like that standing around. They can still see you. Nothing's different. And in most parts of the galaxy, you don't lose your bank account, your family, your spouse, your friends, your money, your car, your house. You don't lose any of that. And then you can have another body, or you can recycle through and have start off as a baby again. But the point is, there's no like seeing of the light. The light, when you die, when you see the light and are attracted to the light, that is ET tech. That's actual technology. And when you get sucked in or attracted to the light with a really warm, attracting type of feeling coming from it, after you get in, you get zapped by an electronic, like a lightning bolt shock, except way higher voltage than that, and it rattles you as an ISB. And you lose your telepathic and, remote viewing capabilities. And you can imagine, if you're really shocked about anything, imagine as a normal human, when you're really upset and shocked about something, your normal capabilities and facilities, they go out the window. So that's basically what happens. So you have the death trap experience. So you have two things that I've talked about so far, which is a psi suppression field over the entire planet, which you leave when you leave the planet and go into orbit, say. And then you have the death traps themselves. So when you pop out, you see the light, you get sucked into the light, you get shocked, and then an AI takes over, and starts putting in false memories and all types of stuff. You can't trust anything. Once you're attracted into the light, you can't trust anything that you remember after that. So anyway, then on the third element of mental manipulation that humans on Earth are, is psychological manipulation. So a psi suppression field, and then in the dying and rebirth process, there is the death traps. And then the third is a psychological manipulation through secrecy, control of the media, and control of all channeling outlets. So when people are doing channeling, that's part of it. And also fear, intimidation expressed through various means, and also direct mental manipulation. Now that is especially relevant on the part of human leaders and the elite. They get mentally manipulated. So those are the three things. We have a psi suppression field, which I've given you evidence of today from the Defense Intelligence Agency's own report of telepathy being much easier to do when you're in orbit as compared to on Earth. And the death traps experience, and then the normal psychological stuff. So you can sort of that is involved with the media, secrecy, suppression of information, control over social media, stuff like that. So that you can see that this idea of managing a prison planet is very diverse, and it's really well thought out. There's no one simple thing. So the type of suppression that you see on planet Earth could not be done by just simple human people. So this is really good, solid evidence that our whole story about this being a prison planet run by a hostile group of extraterrestrials is very real. because only a very hostile group of extraterrestrials could pull this off. I mean, this is really advanced. A Psi suppression field, the death traps, and the detailed manipulation of psychology on terms of what people and what information people are exposed to. Does everybody get it? How complicated this is? This is a really very sophisticated psyops, a very sophisticated attempt to control this population. So anyone who says it's just something sort of simple, they're missing the whole boat. And we've talked a lot about the death traps. So if people are saying, okay, it's only the death traps, that's the only reason why I can't have the telepathic capabilities, that's not it. That's why training with remote viewing and training with telepathy is so crucial, because you're overcoming a lot. Okay, if we could put you on a rocket and send you out into space, then the telepathy part and the remote viewing part would be easier. But I'm sorry, we don't have a rocket to pick you up and to take you into space. So you have to learn it here on Earth. And if you're going to learn it here on Earth, we have developed means of communicating without circumventing a lot of these processes. That's why the so-called goody teas who we work with are so happy when they really are giddy happy when we're talking with them, when we're communicating, because they know we're working within those same confines. We're working within the context of the Psi suppression field, and we're still able to communicate with them. So they're really happy because they see great hope in the ability to free all of humanity. If we can do it, other people can do it. Okay? So it's those three things: the Psi suppression field, the death traps, and the psychological manipulation of the masses. That's what the goody teas are up against when trying to free this planet. So understand that anybody who would set up a human prison based on those three things, a Psi suppression field, the death traps, and psychological manipulation of the masses, they've invested a lot to maintain this planet as a prison, a psychological prison, but still a prison. It was not a small thing. So when the goody teas come in and try to break everybody out, they just can't invade and knock out the baddie teas. It's a huge issue. You have to deal with the masses on the level of those three things that are simultaneously happening at the same time: the Psi suppression field, the death traps, and the psychological manipulation of the masses and the human leaders and the elite. So this is a really complicated thing to overthrow this and to release the planet. So a lot of people have been posting on our forums and elsewhere, why don't the goody teas just come in and just deal with it, get rid of the baddie teas? And it's not so easy, because the human population is really trapped in a very, very complicated, sophisticated system. All right, so that's that. Now, the next thing I want to go into is the evidence that we have here that the reports that we have been using, that coming out, are actually being used. All the military intelligence people, they can shut down, and they do typically shut down, all major groups that are involved in serious aspects of disclosure. Now, there's less of that happening now, but in the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s, it was very widespread. Any group that sort of raised its head to be really significant just got shut down. So the very fact that we're here at Farsight talking about these very deep stuff, that gives you an indication that things are changing, because we could be shut down in a blink of an eye. Don't think for a second that we have the capabilities of defeating the Defense Intelligence Agency or the CIA or something. We're being allowed to do what we're doing. That the military and the government is split. Some of the government desperately wants, some of the military desperately wants all the information that we're talking about to come out for real, for free. I mean, for everyone to know this stuff. The other half probably wants us wiped off the face of the earth. So there's a split in the government, and the only reason we're able to do what we're doing is one half is allowing us to do this and supporting us in that way. So that half is also very concerned about the use of remote viewing and the ability of remote viewing to solve certain problems, intelligence problems dealing with their political elite. So let's switch over to Trump threats. That's President Donald Trump. We have come out with a lot of stuff dealing with threats to President Donald Trump, and also stuff dealing with the Middle East, stuff dealing with Europe. And some of the people say, oh, well, we had these, post-election aftermath stuff and the assassination attempts on Donald Trump, and there's still, nothing's happened, what's going on? And we keep telling people we do these things in order to help the intelligence services be alert that they're going to happen, and then so they can stop these things from happening. So there is no formal public release of information that says, oh, we saw this Farsight report, and because we saw this Farsight report, we did XYZ to stop that thing from happening. So you're not getting, and we're not getting, any feedback that our work is actually being taken seriously. And so from a consumer point of view, you're saying, well, maybe just the Farsight stuff isn't real. It's just not happening, and so we should just maybe disregard it and sort of just move on with our day. So there is a new book that's going to be released on March 18th by Alex Eisenstadt. And the name of the book is Revenge, the Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power. Now, Alex Eisenstadt had direct contact with the deep people inside Trump's campaign. And he also had direct contact with intelligence people. It's a really important book. So I want to encourage people to actually read the book. So Alex Eisenstadt has his own website, Axios, where he talks about his book. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about I'm going to read a small blurb of stuff that he's talking about with his book so you can actually see how serious the attempts to kill Donald Trump, to assassinate Donald Trump have been, and are ongoing. So let's actually read something from this. And this is directly taken from Eisenstadt's website. Okay, here it is. Iran, so these words that I'm going to say right now are actually from Alex Eisenstadt. Iran's threat to assassinate Donald Trump during the 2024 campaign was far more serious than publicly known, and led to extraordinary precautions by his team that including using a decoy plane and it was another jet operated by one of Donald Trump's friends. So that included using a decoy plane to avert a feared attempt on his life. And why it matters. This is from Alex Eisenstadt's website. My upcoming book, Revenge, the Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power, reveals the depth of U.S. authorities' concerns about an Iranian attack on Trump and how it impacted him. Iran clearly, again, this is still Alex Eisenstadt's words, Iran clearly is still on Trump's mind. Last week, he said he'd given his team instructions to obliterate Iran if its operatives were to kill him. Now let me intervene here. That means he's still being told that Iran is trying to kill him today, like now. Then on again, and now continuing with Alex Eisenstadt. He later tempered that remark by saying he wanted a verified nuclear peace agreement with Iran, which has targeted Trump since 2020, when, as president, he ordered an airstrike that killed Qasem Soleimani, and he was a top Iranian military leader. Now, for the book, which is set for release on March 18th, I was given, again, this is Alex Eisenstadt, I was given extensive access to Trump's inner circle during his campaign. Law enforcement officials warned Trump last year that Tehran had placed operatives in the United States with access to surface-to-air missiles. Okay, let me break now. This is something we reported on in some of our deep news stuff. and what some of our mysteries projects, we were reporting that hostiles in the United States actually were in the United States, that they had operatives and that they had access to missiles that could actually hit Trump from very far away. We have reported on this, and a lot of people were saying, I haven't seen the missiles, it's nonsense. This is Alex Eisenstadt actually reporting that U.S. intelligence had directly told Trump that this was true. All right? And again, the book is coming out on March 18th, so you can read it for yourself. So something that we told you about, way back when, starting in like December. Actually, we told you about that earlier than that, like in November and December and so on. And then we told you about it before that. Actually, I think our earliest reports go back as far as October with regard to things like this, that hostiles in the United States had gotten in. It was easy for people to get through that open border. And then the only trick was to get the missiles and other stuff in. And that could have been gotten over the border because you can get drugs in huge quantities. These drugs require things like 18-wheelers to tote around the United States. So you can obviously get these weapons in. But the idea that the actual weapons included things like, long-distance missiles, people sometimes didn't take that too seriously when we talked about it. But now you have the intelligence people telling Donald Trump's own people that it's true, that these hostiles actually have missiles, and they can shoot the president's plane down. They can use missiles to, hit people on the surface and things like that. Okay, so this is again from Alex Eisenstadt again, with their operatives in the United States with access to surface-to-air missiles. Again, still with now this is back to just Alex Eisenstadt's own words. Trump's team worried that the Iranians could try to down his easily recognizable personal jet, better known as Trump Force One, as it was taking off for landing. Now, the concern intensified after a foiled assassination attempt of Trump at his golf course in West Palm Beach in Florida on September 15th. Iran hasn't been linked to that incident or the shooting in Pennsylvania 2 months earlier, in which a bullet nicked Trump in the ear. But, and this is again still Alex Eisenstadt, but at one point soon after the Florida incident, Trump's security detail was concerned enough about the Iran threat that it had Trump travel to an event on a decoy plane owned by Steve Witkoff. Now, he's a Trump friend and real estate executive who's now Trump's envoy to the Middle East. Much of Trump's staff traveled on Trump Force One that day, infuriating some aides who worried they'd be collateral damage if the jet were shot down. Co-campaign managers Susie Wiles, now White House Chief of Staff, and Chris LaCivita decided to split up. Wiles traveled on Witkoff's plane with Trump, while LaCivita joined staffers on Trump Force One. This is still Alex Eisenstadt. Many aides on Trump's jet didn't learn about the hush-hush plan until just before takeoff, when they realized Trump's window seat was empty. This is a quote from some of his aides. "The boss ain't riding with us today," LaCivita told the group. "We had to put him into another plane. This is nothing but a sort of test for how things may happen in the future," unquote. Now, the campaign leaders tried to assure Trump aides that they weren't being used as bait. But if Iranian operatives had access to surface-to-air missiles, several aides wondered why were they put on board. The flight was a surreal experience with gallows humor galore. 3 aides later told me, and that's Alex Eisenstadt, "This was some serious shit," they said. Those on board realized. Okay, and continuing with Alex Eisenstadt, within the campaign, the ride on Trump's jet that day would become known as the ghost flight. The Secret Service also organized a decoy motorcade that day, with Trump in one and staffers in another. There were other scares for Trump's campaign. The Secret Service warned campaign leaders after a September 18th rally on Long Island, New York, that they had intelligence that someone might be looking to shoot up his motorcade. Don't fucking hang out the window and take photos because you're a fucking target, La Civita darkly joked to Trump's social media guru, Dan Scavino. Wiles reclined her seat back. During a trip to Pennsylvania the next week, the Secret Service agents noticed a drone following Trump's motorcade. Now, the officers in one of the cars opened up the moonroof and shot it with an electromagnetic gun, disabling it. Now, in some of our deep news reports, we specifically reported on exactly that Trump would be driving in his motorcade and there would be an aerial attempt to hit him in the car. That was exactly what we reported. And now it's being reported that that exact type of thing is what they were looking for, and they had an electromagnetic gun to shoot it down before it hit the car. I mean, guys, what more do you want? Okay, so it is true the event didn't happen, but the event as it was planned did occur. It was, they tried to do it. Okay, now continuing with Alex Eisenstadt, campaign insiders told me that Trump was more worried about the Iran threat than he publicly let on. Trump often had boasted at rallies about his killing of Soleimani, that was the Iranian general. But as the Iranian threat intensified, staffers noticed that he talked about it less. And privately, he began expressing more concern about the staging of his events. He also worried voters would get assassination fatigue. Would Americans, he wondered, want to go through 4 years of their president being under threat? All right. Now, folks, our deep news reports indicate that Iran is still fighting back. They're still doing that stuff. Assassinating Trump is still on their agenda, as well as attacks on Israel. They have missiles within the continental United States. And this is not Alex Eisenstadt, this is me talking now. They have missiles within the continental United States that can be used to hit various targets. Friends, I don't know what more I can give you in terms of telling you that the reports that we give are being taken seriously by Secret Service and U.S. military intelligence. And this book by Alex Eisenstadt is really good. It's going to be released in March 18th. It's good to buy it and read it. It's really good evidence that the type of things that we're reporting on is exactly the types of things that the Secret Service are working on and doing. It's not just that they're thinking about it. They're shooting down drones following Trump and his motorcade. They're shooting them down. They're not like, this isn't just sort of like maybe thinking about it or looking for it. They're seeing the drone and they're shooting them down. And you can be certain that Alex Eisenstadt is not being told everything. The fact that he's being told so much is amazing. And this so closely corresponds with everything that we've been reporting in advance that it's really hard not to take what we're doing seriously. Anyway, that's really what I wanted to talk with you about today. I wanted you to hear about the direct efforts to suppress you, to suppress your own abilities to have telepathy, the abilities to have psi functioning, remote viewing capabilities. And I wanted to go through the three things. We've often talked about the death traps, and we've often talked about the media manipulation and the psychological manipulation, that type of stuff. But now I wanted to introduce the idea that there's really high-tech stuff involved, a psi dampening field. And our intelligence services are totally aware that that exists. And if this goes back to the 1970s, you can imagine how much information they have about that now. So if you were to ignore it and say, I don't have any proof about that, I don't have any proof about that, like, you're in a vacuum. It's nuts to not take it seriously. U.S. military intelligence is actually writing reports about this, and they're not saying maybe. They're saying that this is actual results. That telepathy works in space, but as soon as people get back on the Earth, it doesn't work so well. That's direct evidence of Psi dampening field. So then when you see the stuff that we have about Donald Trump, and then you say, oh, okay, I'm going to dismiss everything with Farsight because no one killed Donald Trump. There was no missiles or anything like that. And now we have the publication of that confirms that the military intelligence was directly telling Donald Trump that the missiles exist and that they were targeting him. Folks, what more do you want? All right, so when we have these things, right now we're having some reports that we're putting out in our deep news stuff about Iran. Iran is terrified. Let's be clear about that. They're really upset with Israel. They want to eliminate the state of Israel. So if you're sort of seeing that Israel's sort of freaked out now, and everybody can see that Israel's sort of freaked out now, they don't like fighting these nonstop huge wars and all the casualties associated, not just with the Palestinian side, but also on the Israeli side. They're not like happy campers wanting to do this. It's not like they're super sadists or anything like that. They're freaked out. They're freaked out. And they're doing stuff that they normally wouldn't do or wouldn't want to do, but they're freaked out. And now you have a situation with our current stuff dealing with Iran, where it's really clear in some of our reports that they're thinking of using weapons of mass destruction. And they wouldn't be doing that unless they were going, if you look at the reports, we have one out with the session by Aziz and another out with a session by Antisam, and we have 3 more of sessions that are coming out this month. The Iranians are thinking of anything. They're thinking of this like they're up against a wall, and they're thinking their ultimate goal is to get rid of the state of Israel. And so Israel, okay, they're doing weird stuff, but they're freaked out right now. And they're facing an adversary, Iran, that either has nuclear capabilities or is extremely close to having nuclear capabilities. I'm not minimizing any of the horrors that have been going on with regard to the current Middle East wars with Gaza and in Lebanon and also in Syria. I'm not minimizing any of that stuff. I'm just trying to explain that the Israelis are not acting just like that for the sake of being like that. They're freaked out. And when people are super freaked out, they do strange stuff. But on the other hand, with the Iranian stuff that we're talking about, that's a real threat. And the Israelis and the United States is very concerned about that. Not just because of a threat directly. Israel is a one-bomb country. Folks, one major bomb in Tel Aviv and the country's gone. United States, however, also has a situation where these missiles are here. They exist in the country. And that's not me talking. Now we're having military intelligence people. And you can read it yourself now on March 18th with Alex Eisenstadt's book. So you can just be absolutely certain that what you're getting in Alex Eisenstadt's book is the tip of the iceberg. And the real question is, how far is it going to go? We don't know. But we're going to keep coming out with our reports, and you're probably going to see things not happening. And we're going to have to come back and remind you, hey, the reason those things are not happening is people are doing things to stop those things. So when we came out with the Trump assassination attempts, Trump assassination threats, stuff that was happening during the campaign, and then after the campaign, immediately after the campaign, when you didn't see those things happen, now finally you have a book by Alex Eisenstadt that explains exactly what the Secret Service and the military intelligence did to stop those things from happening. And it's so detailed that you're actually getting the reports of how the drone was literally following Trump's motorcade, and they had to shoot it down with an electromagnetic gun. I mean, this is really, it should be overwhelmingly obvious that you have situations where remote viewing can see things, and then military intelligence and their own sources, Secret Service and so on, can stop those things from happening. But at this point, you shouldn't be doubting whether this stuff is real. Okay? What you're seeing in Alex Eisenstadt's book is exactly what we said was going to happen if they didn't stop it. And our reports for the Donald Trump assassination attempts go all the way through December of 2025. Okay? This is not something that has finished. It's not gone. And Iran is in they're freaked out too. Don't make a mistake. Iran is freaked out. They're not just a bunch of evil people trying to kill certain people. No, they're totally freaked out. They've got a population that's very young. 80% of the population has absolutely no memory of the Islamic Revolution, of Ayatollah Khomeini. They don't remember the Shah. 80% of their population wants to simply join the Western world. I mean, these young people in Iran, do you think they don't like to listen to music? When they're all covered up in these chodors, and these ladies are all, what do you think's underneath those chodors? A lot of them, the young kids have bikinis and things like that, and they've got earbuds and they've got iPhones and they're playing the latest music. And they want to live too, and they don't remember any of this Islamic revolutionary stuff. And just look at any young people you see today in the United States or Europe or Australia or in Asia. Look at all the K-pop people. The young people love to dance and listen to music. And look at TikTok. Look how successful TikTok is. That's what young people are like. Do you think Iranian young people are any different than that? Well, the mullahs, the Islamic government in Iran, knows that the population in Iran is severely unemployed and filled with young people that don't give a hoot about the Islamic Revolution, the Ayatollah Khomeini and stuff. They don't give a hoot about the mullahs. So the Iranian government is really freaked out right now. And they're seeing Donald Trump and the Israelis as a direct threat to their survival. So here you have two forces. You have Iran and then you have Israel and the United States. And both of them are looking at the opposite side as being a direct threat to their survival. So let's not mistake about it. Let's not mistake how serious this is. And when the United States actually went, officially it was Turkey and Israel, when they helped engineer the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria in December, around December 8th of 2024, Iran was freaked out. They did not know that was coming. The complete collapse of the Syrian government, of the Assad government, all at once with no warning. Russia was taken by surprise. Folks, Russia's intelligence service is really good. They were taken by surprise. That's how good it was in terms of causing that to happen. Now, a lot of the Syrian forces that were, supposedly working for Assad, the government of Syria, they were bought off. The generals, a lot of them were just bribed and bought off and said, they told their troops not to fight back, and the troops just walked. And this is now in the historical record. The Russian people the Russian military people that were in Syria at the time, they were looking at the Syrian troops just walk away by thousands. And the Russians were shocked. They were saying, what the heck? They're just walking away. They're not fighting at all. So if you're looking at Iran, Iran is in a very similar situation. The United States and Israel, but particularly the United States, wouldn't blink for a second in terms of bribing military people in Iran to tell their soldiers to walk away. I mean, that's a strategy for winning a war. Just bribe the generals and tell them to walk away. And that's what happened in Syria. So the complete collapse of Syria really freaked out the government of Iran. And so they're starting to think about extreme measures. So when we come out with our deep news stuff, we've come out with 2 reports on Iran, the thinking of the president of Iran as well as the senior religious leader of Iran. We've come out with 2 reports so far this month, and we're going to come out with 3 more so far this month. Take those things seriously. It's not saying that the weapons of mass destruction that our reports suggest are, there and, going to blow up. It's not saying that that's actually going to happen, but if military intelligence doesn't stop those things from happening, they will happen. So what I've given you so far today is evidence that this stuff is real, that we report it, and that U.S. military intelligence and Secret Service definitely takes this stuff seriously and follows up doing things to prevent those exact same things that we report from happening. That's deep stuff, everybody. That's deep stuff. All right, so you can call it all coincidence if you want, but, you know, you can live in a delusional state if you want also. But here we have also reports from within the Defense Intelligence Agency, you know, talking about Soviet efforts to understand the Psi phenomenon and to understand its implications with regard to what happens in space and on Earth. And, you know, what more evidence do you need that this stuff is real? So what you're getting from Farsight is the deep, deep. Now, what I really want to sort of just close off with is all of our major projects. We come out with the deep news on both YouTube and FarsightPrime.com. And these spotlights come out on FarsightPrime.com as well as YouTube. But our major projects that go into the deep, deep of all of these things are on FarsightPrime.com. That's our streaming service. We went through a huge effort to get that going. And it's run by Vimeo. It's state-of-the-art. It's technically on the exact same level as all of the major streaming services, Hulu, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Disney, whatever. I mean, it's really super high quality, but it has a focus just on the kind of stuff that we do. It's just our stuff. In addition, we have other things planned. You have no idea how deep the stuff is that we're planning and that we're actually doing things to make it work. And we are actually going into some other elements as well. In terms of Jedi stuff, like Star Wars Jedi stuff, we're focused on the perceptual capabilities of Psi functioning. But other stuff, which involves telekinesis or psychokinesis, that's also real, and we're actually working on that as well. So we're eventually going to be talking to you about that. That's when, you know, like in Star Wars, the Jedis used their hands and things move. Well, that actually can happen. But we're not specialists in that. There are people who are specialists in that. And so, you know, even within the context of a psi dampening field, there are some people that can do stuff like that. So we're actually investigating stuff like that. All this stuff is going to be coming out on FarsightPrime.com. So if you have not subscribed to FarsightPrime.com, it's in your interest to get the deep, deep, to go through our projects and to read the stuff that's happening and to participate in the forums on FarsightPrime.com. So for you to be a subscriber to FarsightPrime.com gives you the insight that you can't get absolutely anywhere else. You're certainly not going to get this stuff on on any of the major media, which is highly manipulated. So that's really what I really want to emphasize to you, that this FarsightPrime.com is super important for your sake. But also, we have no other source of income than our very inexpensive FarsightPrime.com. And so if you like the stuff that we're doing and you want us to continue with what we're doing so that we can really take the fight to save you and save the planet and the way we're doing it, if you like what we're doing, by you subscribing to FarsightPrime.com, you're making a direct contribution to our ability to keep going. We don't have any government funding, and we don't have any corporate funding, so everything comes out of our streaming service. So I just really want to emphasize to you that the information that you get from FarsightPrime.com is available nowhere else. And a lot of it conflicts with stuff you're getting in the mainstream. All of it conflicts with stuff that you're getting in the mainstream. So, you know, if you really want the truth of what's going on, that's where you'll get the truth. Anyway, you've been great today, and we've had a great turnout today. Let me see what the actual numbers are. And yeah, we have a big turnout today. All right. So this is great. Now, I'm going to see you again next week on Sunday. We have our Farsight Spotlight every week. However, I do want to remind you that we take down the live stream version of it in a couple hours, because during that couple hours, we're editing this live stream, and we're making it nice. We get the audio perfect. We edit it to make sure that all the, to make it pretty, to make it good. And we put that up on our YouTube channel, and we release it on YouTube as well as FarsightPrime.com. So don't be upset with us. We always get some angry emails saying, you took it down, where did you take it? But we take it down at the same time that we put it back up, but in better form, okay? So, just hang in there with us. We keep it up for another couple hours. By that time, we're done editing it, and then we put it up as a regular video. And then you'll find it again on our YouTube channel as well as on FarsightPrime.com. Guys, you have been great today. I've really gone into some very deep stuff, really deep stuff that most people tell us, don't tell people about this stuff. It's just over their head. And we say, no, it's not over their head. People have a right to know this stuff. And so I've told you a lot today and given you the background information, the sources for it, and so on like that. So I hope you really appreciate it. And I am going to see you for the next Farsight Spotlight, the Deep Deep, next Sunday. All right? Be there, be square. See you then, folks. Take care.